Hey, King of Podcasts here with you. I've done over 10,000 podcasts since 2005, even before the word podcast was even used, before iPods were invented. Want to go and start giving you a podcasting 101 series. Just take a couple of words as a rule of thumb as to what you should be doing as a good podcaster based on all the experience I've ever had. One of the most important things is if you're going to do a podcast, be consistent. If you're going to do a weekly format, a monthly format, every 2 weeks, every day, be consistent about it. It's like behavior, like a Pavlovian dog. You want to make sure that if you have an episode that's going to drop at a particular time on a particular day, you stay with it. So if you got a schedule as such, do the same, but be consistent about it. You don't want to have a staggered schedule, and you don't want to make it where you take certain weeks off and come back, because people will then tend to go ahead and unsubscribe to your feed or unfollow it. So be consistent. You want to get rid of the stuttering and the stammering you might do during a podcast. Here's another installment of Podcasting 101 to help you figure that out. Listen to yourself back after every podcast. I'm telling you, when you go ahead and listen to yourself and you cringe at every but, you will correct yourself. That is the best way. If you go ahead and go back and you really criticize how you sounded on the playback of your podcast, listen to it in the car, listen to it on your stereo, wherever, but give yourself the whole listening experience that other listeners are going to have, whether it's going to be in their car or on their earbuds doing exercising, whatever it might be. You got to listen to yourself back to get rid of the stuttering, the stammering. Also, take the pregnant pause. Once in a while, when you're talking, just like I did right there, take 3 or 4 seconds. Instead of making yourself go or ah, take a pregnant pause. It's a thing they teach in radio. It's okay if there's a little bit of dead air for like a couple of seconds. Nobody is going to go ahead and just turn off the feed, turn off your podcast, and flip to the next show. Take a minute or two. Go back, listen to yourself. Maybe you don't have to listen to the whole show, but listen to yourself back, because that's going to make you a better podcaster. Podcasters, face it, you're not going to be the next Howard Stern. So stop it. Why I say that? Don't be like Howard Stern. Don't try to do his show and act like all the people that are around you are going to be interesting people that everybody's going to want to listen to. No, get to your topic. When you are in a TikTok society where people want to watch a video for 15 seconds, 30 or 60 seconds, and if it's a video and you might get their attention for 5 minutes, you need to get to the point, keep your audience engaged. So get to the point as quickly as possible. So your intros, keep them short. When you're getting to your show, listen, thanks for joining us, but get to the point. Sometimes on my podcast, I don't even bother to say a welcome or anything like that. I just get right to the content, because that's what people want to hear. That's the reason you brought them there. So please keep that in mind. Get to the point of your content. Don't be a Howard Stern, because you're never going to be him, not even your best day. I can't tell you how many times when I've heard people act like they're on the radio and they're coming with an inflection. Hey, how you doing? Have a wonderful time. Cliches are being used across the board. At the end of the day, be yourself. Try to be as natural with your voice, your inflection, your tone as you are. Because the best person we want to hear on a podcast is the way you talk to people in real life. Not this crap where you have to feel like you're somebody else. No. Unless you're playing a character or a gimmick, that's one thing. But if it's going to be you, bring your best voice up front. Bring yourself up front. Let people get to know you, get an attachment to you. That is what makes a great podcast. And when you're doing interviews, don't just, that's another story for another day. Control your interviews. The subject right now for this Podcasting 101. One of the things I do great when I do in podcasts is when I have an interview, I'll have a set question or I'll have something I will ask. Make sure it's in the form of a question or it's a statement, and I ask them to please go ahead and expand on what we're talking about. But most importantly, once you get the answer that you want and you find a pause or a breath that person takes and you feel like you want to move on to the next subject, Jump in like you're merging as a car going into traffic. You're merging and getting yourself into the next lane. Politely do it. So what you do is, if you have to apologize a little bit, sorry, but hey, I really appreciate that. And I like where you're going with that. But let me go ahead and ask you about this. I will go ahead and cut off and politely go ahead and move along in the conversation. I think doing that and being able to go ahead, and if you hear something in the conversation, this is also to respect to the interviewee, that you're listening to them, you're paying attention, and you're saying, wait a minute. So what you're saying is this. So let's go and talk about this. Or let me ask you about this. Those kind of thoughts right there is what helps to make a great interview. Stay in your lane. What I mean in this podcasting 101 episode is the fact that a lot of podcasters will go off into tangents and will just start talking about other things in their life or their family or other things that are going on they watch in the news. But then you're swaying people away from the fact that people went there to watch or listen to you about a particular topic. So why not just stick to that? What's so hard about that? Just one of the thoughts I come across, because I know I do 3 different podcasts myself. One's on wrestling, and I only talk about wrestling. If I do one on that's on broadcasting, that's all I talk about. And what I do is, if I want to talk about other subjects, I have a show called When I'm Not Podcasting that covers everything else. It's a general interest show, like a water cooler. So you could do a water cooler show, but if you are positioning yourself as a show about a particular niche or a topic, stick to it and stay in your lane. Maybe you've heard of breaking the fourth wall or being behind the curtain. Okay. When the performance is being done, we don't need to be worried about what's going on in the background behind the scenes. The behind the scenes is for that. For some podcasters to want to go ahead and talk about their technical issues or about the issues they have in terms of putting the show together and the people they're working with, you know what? Cut that down to a minimum. Stick to what you're talking about on the show. Because to go along and say, oh, we're having technical issues or things like that, or always having to point out something that's not correct on the show, the better line of judgment is to not bring it up. Like, if people catch it or comment about it, that's one thing. But for you to go and bring it up, it just minimizes and, kind of brings your show down and degrades it a little bit, in my opinion. If you don't sound good, you won't look good. That's the focus of this podcasting 101. Yours truly, king of podcasts. I've done over 10,000 of these, almost 15,000. Maybe I know a little something about a little something. So when you, at least for me, I've always brought on guests for my own programming or for the networks I work for. And it's always a matter of, regardless, now everybody has Zoom calls and they can do the video conferencing and record that way. But I need to make sure they sound good. We had so many complaints come in about how everybody sounds. They sound like they're in a big cavernous cave, or it sounds too tinny. People can really complain. There's something to be said about how you might hear an NPR podcast and how good the microphones sound and how everybody just sounds real clear. It's easy to listen to. Every word can be heard. You want to get the same thing coming from with your guests. So you want to go ahead and talk to them ahead of time. Make sure to give them the prompts to get a good microphone or a headset. You want to do AirPods, you could try that, but it might have that kind of a Bluetooth phone sound. You might want to watch out for that. Take a few minutes, talk to them. Hey, see if you can try to figure out how to make this work so you can make them sound better. Ask them if they have a headset or earbuds or something like that so they could use for the recording. They should at least take a few seconds just to at least do that. That would be very helpful. Guest introductions, the focus of this podcasting 101. If you're going to go and do an introduction for a guest, you give enough to give enough proper context. But then if you want to talk more about this person's stellar career, all their accomplishments, embed that into the interview as part of questions, or add it as some part of commentary you have in between what you're doing. Say you're coming back from a commercial break that you take, or if you're transitioning to another segment of the conversation, you want to go ahead and add the extra information about them, play off to it, call up to it, and make a point to say, okay, here's some of the other things you've done. We don't want to go and leave this out of the conversation. So that's some of the things you could do when it comes to a guest introduction, and letting the guest really let people know what the guest has done. Sometimes I might not talk about something done in their career previously until later on, because it might be just something that's a good kicker, a good way to finish off the interview. And I've done that a lot of times. That's something I would also include too. You don't have to put a long, drawn out, winded bio that takes 5 minutes to get through and just for you to go and finally get to the guest. there's more time for that. Just sprinkle it out, spread it out throughout the interview. Stay in control of your podcast. That's the focus of this podcasting 101. There's been times where a guest might come on, might be a little too friendly, and they might feel like, oh, I like radio. This is so cool, fascinating. And they like to break the fourth wall and say, oh, I'm sorry, my microphone messed up, or sorry, my cat got in the picture. Things like that. You want to try to control that from happening because it does kind of downplay your show and downplay what you're doing, and can also easily distract you for what you're trying to do, the real mood of the conversation and the flow. You want to keep in mind on that and just keep your guest back on track with it. If you're recording it, please go ahead and stop. Make sure to kind of just take out any kind of imperfection like that and to just move along after that. But I always say with guests, you want to make sure that if something like that goes on, kind of just ignore it, move along, keep the conversation going. And that's just not wasting people's time. And you have to understand, everybody's a professional. Things like that happen where it might be something that happens on camera or somebody's microphone might just cut out for like a half a second. Doesn't mean you need to cut it out altogether. And if you can make sure the guest doesn't give you that kind of trouble, some people are just going to do it anyway. It's just unavoidable, but try the best you can to control the conversation, control the guests from doing anything that will just kind of really distract you or make you have to do particular edits you don't want to do. And also, if you're doing it live, you want to just make sure to kind of just keep the show on the road. That's what you got to do. Anyway, I got more tips coming up for you very soon. And please follow and share. And if you want to go ahead and reach out to me, work with me so I can help consult and get your podcast off the ground the right way. I've done over 10,000 podcasts. I might know a little something about a little something. Go to my website, kingofpodcasts.com.